This week's guest is David Blandy. David is a British artist who's been described as an artist and a nerd, not by me, I have to say, but by a curator that he's currently showcasing some work with. In actual fact, though, he's learned his trade at the Slade School of Fine Art and the Chelsea College of Art and Design in London. And his work uses video, performances and comics that deal with what is described on Wikipedia as his problematic relationship with popular culture, which we'll ask him about shortly. And that particularly, I think, includes gaming. He has a number of accolades to his name. In 2004, he was awarded an artist residency with Grisdale Arts. In 2008, he was shortlisted in the Jerwood Moving Image Awards. In 2010, he won the Breakthrough Award at the South Bank Show Awards in London. And he was nominated for the Film London German Award with Larry Achiampong in 2018. He has an incredibly impressive CV. His artworks have been exhibited all over the world. In fact, the list is so enormous, I won't even try to highlight parts of it. But I will put a link on the website in the show notes for you. David's work can also be found in collections held in Arts Council England, in Kiasma's Museum of Contemporary Art in Helsinki. If I can get this name right, it'll be a miracle. Zabludovic collection in London, the Sindika Dokolo Foundation in Luanda, the Julia Stoschek collection in Dusseldorf, the Hammer Museum in Los Angeles, and the Museum of Contemporary Art Rosario in Argentina. I mean, wow, what a collection of work all over the world. Now, we featured David's work in our films review show in June, Ricky's Pick, and actually it was something that I think we all had quite a lot to say about. So what's great now is that we get a chance to put some of our thoughts and comments to you here today. So welcome to the show, David. It's really great to have you here. Thanks for taking the time out to talk to us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's great to talk to a real expert of it, Machinima.
Oh, you're very welcome. Let's start with you telling us a bit more about your work then, please.
Okay, so I've been making videos, performances for the last 20 odd years, mostly around trying to work out who I am in relationship to popular culture. What is it that makes us who we are? And a large part of that has been video games and various other popular cultural artifacts like anime, manga, hip hop, soul music. Just, all these things that go into that great big soup that creates identity. And video games have been there for forever, really. I grew up on the Amstrad 6128 with built-in disk drive, and playing Manic Miner and Jet Set Willy, that sort of thing. And soon kind of graduated to things like the Mega Drive and playing Street Fighter with my brother. And then PlayStation. I ended up working at a video game shop for a couple of years, where I really kind of did my apprenticeship in actually understanding the culture of video games, not just like playing them by myself in my bedroom or against my friends, but kind of finding the wider world of broken mechanics and rivalries and comradeship through a shared passion, which is what video games are. And through all this, I started thinking about, I was making a lot of artwork around found objects, the things that you kind of find around you and what those objects mean. And I was finding that the objects that meant the most to me were the spaces that existed inside games, like Doom, like Final Fantasy VII. I mean, this is a long time ago. like Tekken 2. My degree show piece for Chelsea was the background of Yoshimitsu's stage from Tekken 2, which is a forest. It's a forest, and I kind of took out all the characters and the power bars, and so it's just a forest. And it looks sort of kind of slightly ominous, and it's slow. It's a slow tracking shot which never ends. It's sort of like a kind of circular loop of this, because that's how the arenas were formed in Tekken 2. It's like kind of a large photo montage background, which you kind of had a 3D characters inside, and yeah, projected that into the wall, so you're kind of looking through the wall into this sublime vista, and it was kind of thinking about finding that sublime moment inside something that is supposed to be, I don't know, throwaway entertainment or whatever, which is Tekken. So yeah, so it kind of, yeah, it's been there for a long time. I also have a kind of interesting relationship with art history, I suppose, because my father is also an artist. He's a landscape artist. He does pastels of mostly trees, painting the same tree every day from the same place, so you can kind of see the changes of the seasons and things. And I worked with him on a project called Backgrounds, which where I took backgrounds from fighting games, mostly by SNK or Capcom, and asked him to draw those backgrounds as though they were actual landscapes. And yeah, he kind of took on the task. And then I recorded a conversation of us discussing the process and what he felt he was doing, kind of drawing these kind of, in a way, dead landscapes for him, because it's like, they're static, whereas the things that he's used to drawing are kind of, still something from life. And then we kind of it becomes a conversation about art, about life, about the kind of Oedipal complex, maybe, I don't know, all sorts of things, like all wrapped up inside us as pixelated avatars walking through these incredible backgrounds from crazy fighting games. But really, the first real machinima I made was with Larry Achiampong, and we had been making a project about the philosopher and activist Franz Fanon, who was wrote some really important texts like Black Skin, White Masks and Wretch of the Earth. And he was reported to have written some works of fiction, some plays. And in some ways, his theoretical texts really outline what the problems are around race, identity, empire, the history of colonialism, but they don't really offer like a strict, like, humanitarian solution to where we go. And so perhaps we could make a kind of metaphorical journey to find those lost plays. They've since been found, those plays, and they're very beautiful, but these films still exist in kind of their own little world. So the first film, we looked at the history of this kind of race, identity, that relationship, and our friendship, really. That's kind of the center of the work. But then we wanted to go into the virtual realm, and that's where Grand Theft Auto 5 came in really handy, because it's like, here's a ready-made world. I was talking about ready-mades and found objects, and here's a kind of, the found object was the world of Grand Theft Auto, with all its problems, its kind of stereotypes and racial stereotypes, kind of class stereotypes, all sorts of, and it's partly satire, but it's also it also plays to the satire, so you kind of it tries to have its cake and eat it, and I think that's a very, very kind of difficult situation for a AAA game. So but we were looking to go inside that game, and a game about violence and about kind of appropriation in many ways, and twist it and turn it and make it into our own space for contemplation and talking, and trying to talk through this kind of ever increasing issue of the day, really. It's since we made it in 2015, it feels like it's become even more relevant. So so that was us working inside Grand Theft Auto 5. We then worked with a lot of different groups using that technology. So we have a soundtrack that we made using synthesizers, and then gave the game engine to various groups, said, create an avatar, what story would you like to tell around this? And we ended up talking to paperless migrants in Oslo, and they told the story of their migration while their avatar walks through this kind of virtual landscape. And then working with veterans who are in the criminal justice system in Liverpool. So they were currently incarcerated and were telling their stories from inside jail. It was quite hard to get a PlayStation inside jail, but we managed it in the end. And then they were kind of telling their stories. Some of them wrote songs, some wrote poems, but they all created their avatars and kind of went on little journeys, and then we kind of made films out of all of that. It became, again, another work of Machinima. We've since worked with oh God, I've forgotten the name of it. It's a medieval type game, lots of mods. It's not Elder Scrolls, it's
Assassin's Creed.
No, it's not Assassin's Creed. It's like one of the most modded games ever. I just had a complete blank. But anyway, that was actually, despite me forgetting what it is, it was much less friendly to make Machinima in, because you had to do it all through hacks, because it was like, you kind of had to hack a camera in a way that creates some quite interesting spaces, because at the end of the film, kind of let the camera just roll out into the distance, and you see all the models getting steadily more and more degraded until there's like almost nothing apart from just the horizon. That was for a film about Hadrian's Wall. But yeah, been working mostly with Unity and Unreal Engine recently to just give a bit more freedom, really. Machinima is an amazing space, but it's kind of, I love the aesthetic, I love the meaning. I also love working with found objects, but it just gives a bit more flexibility to kind of work within something where you can actually kind of place things in and out.
Yeah, I think that's a kind of a trajectory a lot of machinima filmmakers seem to have. They start out with game-based attempts, if you like, and then end up on the more bespoke type stuff, like you say, Unreal or iClone,
right? Yeah,
or Blender even.
Yeah,
and move on from there, really, and they sort of sidestep the kind of indie fan type stuff to being more of an artist, which is interesting, I think, because you've done it the other way.
Yeah, and I guess I'm always looking for the right, or the kind of the is that Bruce Lee philosophy of like minimum effort, maximum effect. So it's like how do you create a 3D world really quickly, and like kind of Grand Theft Auto did it, but it also had you kind of play with all the associations that come with it. So I think as long as you are aware that it's not going to be a perfect facsimile, it's something else. It's kind of, you're working with a game space, and you have to acknowledge that it's an interesting space to work with.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we month after month we're amazed at the quality of the work that's coming out and the breadth of work that's coming out. Anyway, what I wanted to ask you talk a little bit about cultural forces, or I read somewhere that you talk a little bit about the cultural forces that inform and influence what you're interested in terms of how you explore those cultural forces in your work. What kind of cultural forces are we talking about here? It's not just game, I guess, and it's not just game.
Yeah, I guess it's and I come from quite a psychotherapeutic background. So,
okay.
So I'm talking in terms of like Lacanian theory that you mirror the things that are around you, and you kind of find yourself in the things that you look at, whether you want to or not, in a way. Like when you're controlling Mario in Super Mario 64 or something, he becomes a little part of you inside the screen, and it feels like he's completely free to do whatever, but then you kind of come up against the invisible walls. You come up about the fact that you can't pick your nose or something, like, there's only so many actions that are allowed. So it's kind of an illusion of freedom, which kind of shifts around, and then it makes you think, well, what are the systems I'm living in my everyday life, and is that also a kind of an illusion of freedom? So it's sort of looking at those mirrors that happen, ideas of control. I think, the controller is a really interesting thing in video games. It's like, often the perfect way to play a video game is to do exactly what the video game wants you to do. I'm just thinking of something like, say, Guitar Hero or Dance Dance Revolution or something. It's where, like, if you mimic the computer completely, then you win the game. So it's kind of like, and it's kind of similar with a lot of kind of pattern-based recognition games like Tetris or something. But then you've got sort of that thing of fighting games where it's all about the mastery of the controls, and yet again it's about you conforming to how the controller wants you to act, even though, like, there's sort of there's kind of free will in it, and you're often fighting against an opponent. So it's sort of about you have to do combos in this particular timing, all of this stuff. So it's kind of an interesting thing of, as humans, we're very drawn into being controlled by something, and yet we also want to kind of have our own space. So that's the tension that I find. And I guess there's that the kind of the meta level tension is that these are all like artifacts and culturally produced by capitalism. So it requires a huge kind of corporations making lots of money out of the fact that you're having fun. Yeah. So like that is, although I love this, a lot of this output, and I love these games. Final Fantasy VII made me cry. I have kind of really intense relationships with these spaces. It's also, you're having a relationship with a kind of a piece of capital, effectively, something that it becomes like does it actually have meaning? And so that's the tension. I think it does. I think it's really, it's psychically important. It creates incredible community between people from disparate places, disparate walks of life. Like it's really the thing that brought me and Larry together as friends, was the fact that we had shared memories of Zelda Ocarina of Time and Metal Gear Solid, and like we could. I could say Snakeu to him and he'd know what I was talking about. And like, it's just these kind of weird little, like, it becomes a subcultural language of understanding. And really they're like shared memories, aren't they? It's Absolutely. Like, when you watch the same film, it's like when you play, somehow games have a different intensity. It's like, because it's interactive, it feels much more like you have agency, and I think that makes it kind of imprint on you in a really deep way, let alone the longevity. You're playing a game for, again, Final Fantasy VII, like 100 hours to get the Black Chocobo and everything. Like, it's just, it's a much more kind of immersive thing. You don't sit there watching Star Wars for 100 hours. Well, some people do, but it's like, it's more, I just think it's more of a kind of common cultural thing. And I think the increasingly online, it's mostly an online thing now, I would say. Like my son, he purely plays online. It's just Apex Legends, Minecraft, like it's always with friends. It's always with, it's very rarely just against AI, which is how I grew up playing games. It's always just you against the machine, whereas now it's always kind of all against all, like, or kind of, playing in little teams. Like it's a much more kind of social space, whether that's kind of social through voice or just social through action, kind of collaborative storytelling in a way. It's kind of, it's grown from there.
Well, I mean, it's quite interesting that you say that, because how do you reflect that kind of change in the way that games have evolved then in the works that you're doing? Have you got a sense of how that's taking place in your work?
Oh, that's interesting. I think there's, if I look back to my early works, they very much were about my relationship to the machine space. So it was thinking about it as a space that a single person was entering into. And then the more recent works feel much more about a conversation inside something that's going on. So like even backgrounds that, it's like the 2-player game. It's two people in an arcade playing against each other. But then it's kind of, once you get into like Grand Theft Auto 5, and it's kind of, you're meeting at a spot. Even the making of that film was very much like, yeah, I'm down by the pier. Like, how long do you think it'll take you to get here if you steal a car? Like it was kind of that physical thing of actually kind of scouting out spaces and getting into scrapes while you're trying to make a kind of elegiac work of fantasy. It's like, it feels much more about forging forms of community now than it did. I hadn't really considered that before, but I think that's true. I think there has been a shift in how it's understood. I mean, when I was making that work using Tekken 2, like I had to explain to people what video games were. Like in 98, 99, it wasn't like a common cultural phenomenon. It was a geek thing. It was like, a thing that just like comics were for quite a long time. It's but now it's just like so mainstream. It's like the way that Marvel's dominated cinema. It's everyone has a video game in their pocket on their phone. So it's like, it's become, in a way, the dominant aesthetic is the game, which is quite a fascinating shift.
It is, but it's still pick your geek.
Oh yeah. I think it's the level to which you become immersed in those things. People do things casually and then they do things hardcore, and it's like, that there'll always be that kind of tension, I think.
Yeah, well, you're definitely the hardcore side of it, I think. I mean, that's certainly the work that we reviewed in back in June, the How to Fly, How to Live. To me, there was definitely a sense there of you seeking personal meaning through the work that you were presenting there. And yet, interestingly, when I looked at some of your other work, I can't even remember what it was called now. The one that you've got, where is it called? Is it Edge of Forever? No, whichever. Where basically what you're doing is interrogating meaning, I think, through the relationship to another person, like Henrietta Lacks or Darwin's taxidermist. So one side you're sort of seeking meaning to you, and the other side you're exploring meaning to these long dead folks, seemingly.
Yeah, I guess it's looking for an understanding of a kind of psychogeographical position of people and places. So, why are certain ideas venerated and why are certain ideas sort of put down? Why is some sort of cultural knowledge seen as very important and other types of cultural knowledge seen as like base or kind of to be disregarded? And I think, a lot of that goes with cultural capital and, essentially like social standing, etc. So Henrietta Lacks's life and body was not seen as a valuable thing. It was seen as almost as a possession. John Edmonston's skills were not kind of lauded until he had this association with the great white man, the Darwin. So it's sort of, how can we say, I guess it's an anxiety about ideas of knowledge and power being intrinsically intertwined. So, often becomes about reinforcing the status quo in some way. And how do you tell alternative stories or alternative ways of understanding the world? And it's sort of that's a lot of the thought there. How to Fly is sort of taking that kind of I would say that's about yearning. It was like it was a yearning for escape and for nature and for I guess meaning, like you say, in the kind of times of deep lockdown. So like it was made right at the start of the pandemic, when it felt like this could go on forever and you're kind of completely isolated. And me and my family were going out for kind of early morning runs as our kind of 1 hour of exercise or whatever that we were allowed. And we'd go out, because we were in Brighton, we were going, just driving about probably too far legally to the Downs, and then kind of going for a run, often seeing the sun kind of almost rising up, and kind of it had that real sense of almost escape and the sublime. And the idea that you could maybe find that through Grand Theft Auto seemed kind of ridiculous to me, but also absolutely perfect, because this is where we were living. We were living inside screens, and we're trying to find meaning through our conversations, through the games that we were playing. I heard so many people getting really into Red Dead Redemption 2 at that time, because it has incredible landscapes, it has beautiful sunsets and things. And it's like, trying to get that real connection to something other, something sublime, almost kind of a taste of the other, something unworldly inside a video game, because you can't get it from outside, because outside was forbidden, so it was sort of playing with that sort of space. And the spiritual text which I adapted from it was very much like, that's another attempt to find a different way of different type of meaning. In some ways I was taking it on in a kind of ironic way. This is something that's trying to be incredibly meaningful, and I don't kind of believe in, I don't know, animal signs, etc. But at that moment, it somehow like all came together into something that became more than the sum of its parts. Kind of had Grand Theft Auto, the Google text, and then the soundtrack, and it kind of it formed this something that was something to be meditated on, maybe.
It definitely invoked meditation. I mean, here's a question for you then: why Cormorant?
It was because it was going to be all about the heron, because I'd had a kind of funny relationship with a funny moment with a heron down on the Serpentine Bridge, where there was one that was just flying around, and it kind of like flew right into my face, and it kind of like, I just thought it's kind of amazing, this huge bird, like just sort of semi-tame in London. I always call
them pterodactyls, actually.
And then I started making this piece, and I was trying to look for a heron inside Grand Theft Auto, and of course, like, the closest they've got is the cormorant. So, okay, well, maybe I can work with that. And so it became like a kind of working with the found object to create the thing that I wanted to do. So that's how it got to the cormorant, and it had those aspects of, like in the text, the kind of the liminality. It's between things, so it's neither of air or water. It's kind of, it's got its feet in both places. So it seemed kind of perfect in the end.
It was a very good story, and I guess really when we were talking about it, we were kind of reflecting on the fact that it starts out as a tutorial and ends up being this almost poetic piece that you just lose yourself in. It was incredibly well done. The narrative side of it just really fitted with what you were seeing on the screen, and then and how you were escaping, basically.
That was it's part of a series, the kind of tutorial series, and all of them they really started from that idea of the intimacy of the YouTube voice. So, because I've studied under a lot of YouTubers, because trying to make my work, kind of learning bits of After Effects, doing bits of Blender or whatever, and it's always like, you know, you need to learn how to, I don't know, create 3D planes in After Effects. And so you look up some video and you've got a 12-year-old telling you, yeah, now you put the little press the screen. You know, you put the x-axis to here, and there's also a real intimacy, because it's like they're talking just to you, even though it's you know, it could be 100,000 people have watched it, or it could be just like 50 people have watched it. It could be like they've put it up and they've got this one little piece of information that you were looking for. Like, kind of, thank you so much. Like, you've saved me hours of work by kind of pointing out this geeky little aspect of the program.
And there isn't anything you can't find out, is there? No,
absolutely. Like, all of knowledge is there in a kind of very, very strange sort of disassociated form. It's sort of, it's people telling you stuff. So I wanted to kind of it to be that shift between different modes of storytelling. So you've got that kind of intimacy, the false sort of immediacy. It's as though I'm just making up. It's sort of kind of improvised ad lib monologue, but you know, I try and reveal the thing a bit. And then it goes into something, a kind of different register. So in the first tutorial of that type, is called how to make a short film about extinction, and it was that voice of kind of I wanted it to be the voice of the planetarium, because I'd been to a planetarium before that, and there's that thing, and you wear the headphones, and it's like they're in your head, and this is the world, and the world is, you know, like it's really portentous, and it like becomes really, it takes you into another space somehow, just the manner in which the voice works. And I wanted there to be that shift within the work. And so this How to Fly, it was much more into that kind of like ASMR kind of, like everything's cool, you know, kind of voice.
I think it did it really well. And yet, and in a similar tone, I don't think this was a part of the same series, but Android's Dream seemed to do pretty much the same thing, but with a different kind of aesthetic look to it. But the net result seemed to be the same.
That was a response to a kind of a demand by Petra Sesman, another artist, who asked me to make a piece of work using computer technology in some sort of way, and I wanted to play with the idea of this, the kind of like cyberpunk as an aesthetic, how played out it was. I was thinking about the recent video games, Cyberpunk 2077, and then kind of rehash of Blade Runner, but then just all of the tropes that go with it, to the extent that there are, like, you go onto Unreal Engine's asset store, and you kind of, you know, there's whole worlds of cyberpunk kind of worlds that just exist there, because it's one thing that people want to make. So it was kind of taking a whole load of those kinds of assets and then adding them to a deep fake version of my voice. So it's I trained one of these AIs to have my voice through kind of speaking the script a few times, and then kind of had them voice the entire track. So you're never listening to my voice, you're listening to kind of an artifact of my voice. And that's kind of was the kernel of that particular film.
And well, the bit that strikes me was where it finishes. There isn't a narrative to follow, because it's gone garbled. and I remember when I was listening to it, I don't actually remember the point at which it changed. I mean, that was so subtly done, but I think that was a genuine, the meditative quality, I think, of what you produced there was it took you on such a journey that you just were in the zone, you know, like you say, that kind of almost Saganish type, like, you know, voice that takes you there, and Little Blue Planets, and
it was
it was that kind of I loved it.
Oh, thank you. Well, it was I think it's kind of an artifact of of the artificial voice, because it reads backwards text in exactly the same kind of tone as any other text. So it tries to make sense of it and makes it sound natural in a way that I don't think if I'd read it backwards myself, I would have had that kind of same fluency. So yeah, it's an interesting kind of moment. I think
that was a really interesting experiment. I really enjoyed that.
Cool.
And the film that I forgot the name of, it's A Lament for Power.
Oh yeah.
And you know, I suppose really extrapolating the point that you're just talking about there, in that particular film, what you've got there that seems to be there's this really strong narrative that goes through it, but also this really sinister growing black blob, just like the blob in the old 50s film or whatever it was, which kind of really, that becomes so dominating and forceful. Is that what the intention was there with that one?
Yeah, I guess it was a metaphor for almost this fear of the return of agency in a way. It's that idea of Henrietta Lacks, almost her revenge. So because her body, her cells are immortal. They reproduce eternally. They were found through basically a biopsy, and they were harvested in the early 50s, and they're still reproducing today, and they're still used in experiments. Wow. They were used to it's called the HeLa cell. They were used to cure polio. So they've achieved great things, but they also were taken without consent. And they say that if you were to put all the HeLa cells together that have been grown in cultures across the world, it would take up more kind of mass than the Empire State Building. Wow. So like this, and that's where that kind of imagery came from. It was that kind of idea of just this explosion of flesh, but also, yes, it's kind of like a horror movie, The Blob, or kind of that kind of idea, but it's also that idea of the return of the real. It's like something that has been repressed just sort of exploding and taking over and being undeniable. I mean, it ends in darkness, that film. It's like the images, in the end, the image runs out, and it's like all you have is the voice. It's like you're inside the blob, and like kind of you have to kind of give yourself over to it, perhaps.
It's an amazingly powerful film. We'll definitely put a link to that one. Definitely have a look at that.
Thank you.
Well, quite different to the others, but
I mean, I think it's very much like, it's a work I don't think I could have made without working with Larry, because it gives a different, the fact that we're having a conversation about these things gives a different, it gives a different agency, gives a different sense of ideas around, I guess, who owns culture and things, which I don't feel that I could have approached that story by myself, really.
And I can understand why you would say that, for sure. We wouldn't have the voice for telling stories like that, I think, because of our color, basically. Yeah,
exactly. It's, you have to be aware of your, part of what makes a work is the artist, and like, where we sit, and not everything is it's always, every subject matter that you come across is, you have to think about your relationship to that thing and how that makes sense. You can't kind of approach everything as though it's neutral. There is no neutrality. there is no objectivity, I would say. So it's like, you have to take that on board, and then once you've acknowledged that and it becomes a part of the work, I think you can kind of tackle things. But that's how I feel about that stuff.
The voice actor that you had on that was also brilliant. I don't know who that was, but she was great on that.
Yeah, no, she was amazing. Yeah, we found her through, we did a a small show in Texas a few years ago, and the curator there kind of gave us her name, and it was really, she did an incredible job.
Absolutely. I'm just looking through my questions. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about your approach to problematizing the game, which seems to be, a big part of how you go about creating the work that you do. Is it always in collaboration with other artists that you do that?
I guess no. Like, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess, I'm thinking of backgrounds. I kind of made that by myself, but then I made it with my dad because he was like the other voice in it. The one for Petra, it was, that wasn't made in collaboration with Petra. It was my own work. But I think it's something that I'm going to, and of course the early work was really like just totally like it was like pictures of me and Ryu playing video games in my front room. Like I did a kind of Photoshop thing. I made a video of me as Mario, so it was kind of a little D on the cap and kind of like glasses and stuff, just looking at the screen and breathing. But I don't know, I find that working in collaboration is often really, it brings a different energy to things, which I really enjoy. Someone to bounce ideas off, and it becomes about a conversation. I was in a band for years and years, like making music, and I think it kind of brings that same sort of energy. My solo stuff tends to be slightly more solipsistic, so kind of thinking about meaning and things, and like How to Fly. So I don't know. I mean, it's something I want to explore more because now I feel much more fluent with Unreal Engine. I feel like there's a next kind of level of things that I want to do with it.
Well, I was going to ask you actually, what's the work process that you have, and where does the idea come from for a project that you've got?
Often it starts with almost a space. I think in some ways I'm primarily a installation artist, maybe. That I like to work with a space and think of that as like what does this space mean, and how can I make an intervention into it to make it mean something different? And then once I have that kind of visual sense of something, then I'll start thinking about the meanings around things and start writing a script or something. And then often kind of the music sort of comes after that. A kind of, what is the tone I want to set for this piece? What is the what is the space that I want to define around this? In the end, it all forms a sort of frame around the kind of core, which I think is often the voiceover. So it kind of becomes all of kind of very elaborate frame for for kind of a conversation between me and the viewer. So
I got you. Now, when you talk about space, do you also talk about the physical space, like the gallery space that it's going to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's there as a sort of abstract for me. Sometimes I'm working with a space that I will know what the space is in order to work with it, but often you don't at the start of a process. But you kind of think, and I think that's why white cubes exist, etc., so that you can kind of have that default to move into and disrupt and change. And I think there's also the space of like the laptop, like here, like you're kind of thinking about this relationship to the screen. So you're thinking about it as something that you can kind of enter into and kind of talk through, rather than necessarily like, I don't know, be immersed in, I don't know, a whole gallery space. Yeah, you approach those two spaces a bit differently.
And yet you've got to kind of somehow get them to intermingle, I suppose, in the work for it to sort of connect to your audience.
You want it to work in all those spaces, and I think that just comes through experience of knowing how different types of shots work in different spaces. What works in kind of in transition over those different sorts of spaces. I think some of my works work much better small, and some really only work once they're installed. But that's like, there was a piece I made which was supposed to be like a planetarium, which is the end of the world, which is displayed on 3 screens. It was supposed to be a big curved screen, but we couldn't make the curve, so it's like 3 screens. But it worked really well. It's like kind of you're sitting in it, and it kind of filled your peripheral vision, and it kind of had that planetarium sense to it. So so seeing that on a laptop doesn't quite have the same effect, I don't think.
No, it's quite. I suppose it would, VR and technologies like that would help.
And VR version of that does exist, and I quite like it. Yeah, it works a bit.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Now, Damien was quite interested in the apparently happy accidents in the workflow that you seem to have. You tell us a bit about how you allow for accidents.
Oh yeah,
I think he was referring to the crashed Cormorant.
Yeah, the crashed Cormorant. That was it was. I guess I wanted to kind of, in a way, I knew where the film was going. I knew the film was going to be like this quasi-spiritual thing. So I wanted to try and make it as kind of clumsy and seemingly haphazard as possible in the first bit. That crash actually happened. Like I was trying to fly the Cormorant, but I thought, when going through the rushes, I felt like that worked really well as a thing. And of course the voiceover is completely, I wasn't talking over it as it happened. It's just like that's just my bad acting. It's like it's just, I have this the whole of that first section is much more, in a way, more contrived than the second section, because I've kind of constructed it as a video that I'm then doing a kind of pseudo freeform chat over. So I kind of even give it away by putting a lot of the text in the script that kind of pops up. Like it shows
I did see that, and I think the others didn't quite. Certainly I knew it was a fake tutorial right from the minute I started to watch it, but I think the others are kind of drawn in more to the fact that tutorial and then a film. But the whole thing just didn't stack up for me. I thought it was really interesting, and that's really where I think part of your approach to cultural appropriation, if that's the right word, I think that's quite interesting, the way you've gone about doing that as well. The fact that you're reflecting on the way that you've interacted with the tutorials simply through that kind of creative process as well.
I think all of these are new cultural forms that are being formed as the internet progresses. We like I don't know, the Zoom meeting is a new space that we can that needs an artwork around it. It's like,
well, yes, I was going to ask, what is your artwork?
So far, my kind of in terms of Zoom and things, I've been working with role-playing games within that space, and that's a really perfect thing for that space, because it's like, you're having a group conversation and you're imagining a kind of, if you're 4 people, you're imagining a 5th space which is between all of you, and it's kind of hyper real to everyone. And I've had some really intense kind of scenarios and moments within that, what to many people is like a hellish space of the Zoom meeting, but it's like, because you all give yourselves over to this fantasy space, it becomes something other, something really interesting. So yeah, that's what I've been kind of investigating in terms of, I don't know, the voice and group chat.
So we've got some interesting Zoom type machinima things to come.
Oh, I don't think so. I think my next thing is deep dive into Unreal 5. I think.
Okay. Well, what I was going to say is, you clearly have a wide breadth of games that you draw on. Possibly only focusing in terms of machinima on some games and not others. And currently a preference GTA 5.
No, I think we've done our last GTA 5 film.
Okay.
like both me personally. I mean, yeah, I felt like, I think probably with me, because for a long time it was my and Larry's work was kind of quite GTA 5-ish. And then it's quite old now. That's like 7 years, isn't it? It's like feels like ancient technology. I think there's some new spaces to explore perhaps. I don't know what the next thing will be, but people keep modding things, so I think these spaces keep growing. Sorry. To some extent, I think it might be quite interesting to work with something that's not so, I don't know, quasi-perfect. Like thinking about much more kind of broken spaces, maybe even kind of go back into the history of gaming and see what spaces could be found there.
Plenty, I would have thought.
Yes.
Plenty of broken spaces, that's for sure.
Definitely.
I was going to ask you then, how does the role of audiences and the way the audience is kind of changing because of online culture, I suppose, how does that now fit into the work that you develop?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think the gallery space is a space. It's been really useful for me in terms of kind of keeping projects going, in terms of having an outlet where I know that I'll have kind of control over how something's consumed in a way. But really the mass space is, well, it's TikTok and Instagram. Like that's where, and YouTube maybe to a lesser extent these days. Those are where moving image is consumed the most. So in a way, it's behoven to artists to try and engage with that space in some way. Again, it's an incredibly problematic space because they're both, artifacts of kind of corporate culture. Like, what is the ownership of things once they move on to that space?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I like to try and engage with people. I don't want to just be talking to an arts gallery crowd. I want to try and communicate with the world. And, if that's where the audience is, that's where you have to try and engage with. I haven't done that yet, but, I think that's maybe an ambition.
Well, I was just going to ask you, are you on TikTok? And what are you doing on it?
Not yet. It's I think it's an amazing space. From what I've seen of it, I love the kind of the sampling culture that exists on there, the kind of the answer video thing that happens there. But I haven't quite kind of got my head around how I could enter into that space yet. But I think it's definitely something I'm mulling over.
Yeah, I think one of the big challenges with those kinds of platforms, if that is even the right word nowadays, is the issue around discoverability. And that seems to be becoming massively more problematic than it ever used to be. I mean, YouTube is a nightmare for finding work that's been created with certain types of assets, or if it's not tagged in the right way, you just can't find it. It's a really challenging space, I think, to be involved with.
No, that's very true.
And none of these platforms seem to be addressing any of that, really. But whether AI is a solution to that.
I would argue that they probably don't care.
No, so would I. I agree with you.
I think we're using these platforms under kind of almost undercover. Like it's not what they're made for. They're made for things that to go viral or to be, a certain type of entertainment that then gets shared around and becomes, a phenomenon. They're not really made for kind of quiet meditations on the meaning of existence. You can find them, but they're pretty well hidden. So it's how to fight against the algorithm in some ways in those spaces and kind of subvert the algorithm. That's the key to that kind of next stage, I guess.
I guess we need to look forward to some of your work doing that.
I can have ambitions, yeah, sure.
Well, I was going to ask you now, how do you see that your work fits into the current world of machinima and kind of real-time production then?
Golly, well, I guess I feel like in terms of machinima, I feel like an outsider artist in that I'm using this form and yet I'm not quite part of the culture. And I would like to be, but I just haven't been up to this point. So yeah, I guess that's something I'd like to get more involved with, because I felt that with my tabletop role-playing experience, that I kind of made a tabletop role-play game, and then I realized that there's this enormous indie world that I kind of hadn't quite understood, and now feel much more inside. And I think that same journey has to take place with machinima to really understand where it is. I'm inside the world of video games, but not so much inside the world of machinima.
That's interesting you should say that. I think it'd probably be fair to say there's probably game-based communities, but the creative space is there for everybody to kind of contribute to, and you definitely do that. So it's not
that's very generous of you, but I guess what I mean is in terms of like kind of a daily, weekly engagement with other creators in the space. I don't feel that I'm in there right now. In fact, I've just started being on a Discord with some of the other artists who are in this exhibition at the Julia Stoschek collection called WORLDBUILDING, which is all around video games and art. And that Discord has been really great. It's quite a few of the artists involved, just discussing what games they're liking, what they're working on right now, and kind of, just swapping kind of under the hood kind of conversations about this fun world, really. And that's kind of the closest I've felt for a while to being part of that community.
And is that open to anybody, or is that just you guys?
At the moment, I suppose it's just us guys, but we could open it up a bit once we feel a bit more comfortable. That'd be great. Maybe I should let you know about it.
Yes, please do, because we'll definitely we'll put I was going to put a link to that particular show in the show notes in any event, because that looks a fascinating show, and obviously some of your work is being shown there, which is particularly interesting, I think. I guess, certainly some of the work that we've been reviewing seems to suggest that machinima has a more and more of a role in the world of art. And I guess, from your perspective, how do you think machinima now fits into the world of arts practice?
I think it's one tool, and I think there are certain. I think it comes from the world of sort of video art, of people working with tech, people working with kind of, I guess, net art and stuff. And it's all kind of come together into almost more like a video game aesthetic. I don't know whether that's machinima per se, but it's using that kind of visual language of video games. as a way to think about often speculative futures and virtual worlds and different ways of living. They seem to be all kind of quite tied up, and also, yeah, the problematics of capitalism. I think a lot of that is wrapped up in kind of video game space. I think for some people it's a very seductive space because it's, you don't need actual materials, you just need access to the technology, so it doesn't have so many overheads, so it's quite an accessible medium. If you've got, like, if you're at art school, then they have computers, so then they can use them. And I think the big schism that exists within that world is between the people who use the aesthetic but don't kind of make the visuals, so they're using it more like as a director. So they'll say to a kind of a 3D artist, right, I want this and this, it's got to look super shiny. A month later they come back, it's like, here's a film, and like kind of then they do their thing to turn it into their art. And then you've got also then the kind of the other side, which is people who are just completely tinkering with like how a Wii controller works, and then kind of turning that, now what could I do, kind of a scrolling shoot 'em up game using this particular technology, and I'll make it all about Black trans lives inside this space. And it all works, it feels like it's very much from within. It's like, is it from within the machine or kind of from outside the machine? It's like kind of these two sides to it. And I think that's kind of the very different approaches that I think end up with sometimes a kind of similar aesthetic, but they come from very different places. And yeah, I'm someone who always is very hands-on. I think I'm mostly I would say a post-production artist. So I'm working mostly with things like After Effects, like me using Grand Theft Auto is typical. Like I would say Unreal Engine is like very much a post-production kind of, it's not me making everything in Blender and then kind of making a world that is entirely mine. It's more, I'm interested in working with the found objects that exist there and kind of playing with that aesthetic and kind of how you can put things together into interesting kind of combinations. Yeah, that's where I kind of stand inside it, is as a kind of, yeah, post-production person.
And have you got any, I was just gonna say, because I think we've been going quite a while now. And I have to say, I do think the comments that I started with, describing you both as an artist and a nerd, are probably spot on. What I was going yeah, I think you've demonstrated that. What I was going to ask was, have you got any words of wisdom for people looking to explore machinima through their arts practice? Have you, if you had to start again, what would you say?
Oh golly, I guess I would say, don't be afraid of it. I think it's a really exciting space. I think there's both the possibility for making almost like sketchbook works, where it's like you just make a simple intervention into something and it becomes an interesting piece. Like there's that piece of work where someone just had a deer running around Grand Theft Auto 5, and that was the work, was like just following the deer as it kind of got into various scrapes. It's really, really simple but very direct. And then also, but then you can get into these things really super deeply and start working with video games properly, like making your own games or making entire spaces. I think it's a very flexible space. You can both approach it with almost no knowledge, but also kind of go into it so deeply that you're kind of in total control of this thing. So I think it's an incredibly exciting space still, and it's actually very accessible. It's not, I think maybe 10 years ago, it would have been more tricky. You could have done, some Machinima would have been possible, but maybe some of the more Unreal Engine, Unity type stuff would be much more difficult. But now it's become much more like user-friendly and possible. And then you can kind of mix in things like, I don't know, LiDAR scans of stuff, or like found objects. There's, people have created a massive array of things that you can populate a world with. So yeah, it's really like a big sandbox right now.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. On that very note then, David, let me say thank you so much for being part of today's podcast. It's been such a delight talking to you. I'm sure Ricky's going to be dead jealous. So thank you very much.
It's been an honour. Thank you so much for having me on.
You're very welcome. You take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.